A few summers ago, people were begging dealers just to get on a waiting list. Now those same 300 horsepower outboards are sitting under price-reduced banners like leftovers. Engines that once sold above full manufacture suggested retail price are suddenly thousands cheaper, some even going for less than owners still owe on their loans. If you own one of those engines, or you're about to sign for one, that swing is the difference between locking in a once-in-a-decade deal or spending years upside down on a motor the bank still owns more of than you do. So what flipped? Did the brands mess up? Did the economy crack? Or did a quiet chain of decisions finally snap and dump too many engines onto too few docks? To really understand why outboards are suddenly cheap, and how not to get burned by it, you have to follow the money from your transom back through the showroom and into the lender's office. The market felt different. If you talk to small coastal dealers, many can point to a week, or even a single Saturday, when things felt off. Where the phone used to ring constantly for 150 to 300 horsepower engines, it started ringing half as often. The same clean, late model Yamaha F 300 that would have been gone in roughly 2 days now sat for a month. One dealer might drop the price a little, then a little more, just to see if anyone was watching. A center console that would have sparked a bidding war in the boom summers now has a lonely listing with a quiet price reduction note. On the surface, nothing dramatic had changed. The engines still start. The brands are the same names everyone knows: Yamaha, Mercury, Suzuki, Honda. The marketing footage still shows smiling families and glassy water at sunset. But beneath that glossy surface, the math driving the market had shifted. What looked, from the outside, like a generous sales promotion was, for some dealers, an act of survival. They were no longer asking, "What can we get for this engine?" But, "How fast can we get this off the floor plan before the interest bill eats us alive?" To understand why the prices flipped so fast, we have to go back a few years to when it seemed like the opposite problem would last forever. As we move, keep that picture in your head. An engine that once felt impossible to find, suddenly waiting for a buyer who is in no hurry at all. How the pandemic built a bubble on the transom. During the height of the coronavirus pandemic, boating became the escape hatch. People could not travel the way they were used to. Concerts, stadiums, and vacations overseas vanished from the calendar. Suddenly, a small center console or pontoon boat looked less like a luxury and more like a lifeline. At the same time, government stimulus money and unusual stock market gains made it feel, for a while, like there was extra cash to spend. Boat shows were canceled, but boat orders exploded. The wait list for anything with a reliable four-stroke outboard stretched from many months to over a year. Manufacturers like Yamaha, Mercury Marine, Suzuki, and Honda were dealing with their own issues. Casting plants faced shutdowns, supply chains for electronic fuel injection components and digital controls were stretched thin. Labor was hard to find. They could not simply flip a switch and double production. Dealers, watching customers lined up for 150 horsepower and 200 horsepower engines, assumed this was the new normal. Many committed to allocations that would have seemed wild a decade earlier. Pallets of mid-range and high horsepower outboards, all financed through floor plan credit lines with low, comfortable interest rates. The thinking was simple. If you can sell every 300 horsepower four-stroke you can get, and customers are willing to pay full price or more, why not commit to a year or two of heavy inventory? On paper, every engine already had a home. But bubbles are built not just on demand, but on the belief that demand will still be there by the time the bill is due. That belief was about to be tested. Picture a warehouse full of crates, each one holding a brand new engine. To most buyers, that image looks like abundance. To a dealer signing the floor plan paperwork, it also looks like a promise they are very sure the market will help them keep. Floor plan debt and the invisible meter running. Most buyers never see the financing arrangements behind the showroom. When you walk into a dealership and see a row of Yamaha F 150s or a line of Mercury 4-stroke outboards, It looks like the dealer already owns them. In reality, those engines generally belong to a bank. This is floor plan financing. A lender fronts the cash, so a dealer can stock engines and boats. In return, the dealer pays interest, usually at a rate that feels painless when things move quickly. When an engine sells, the dealer pays off that engine's share of the loan, pockets the margin, and moves on. During the pandemic years, floor plan interest rates were low. Engines barely had time to collect dust before they were sold. The system worked beautifully. Then, interest rates climbed. That same loan that cost a few % per year started to feel heavier. A Yamaha F300 that the dealer expected to carry for roughly a month might still be sitting after 3/4 of a year. Instead of generating profit, it is slowly erasing it. Now imagine this, not with one engine, but with 50 engines. A dealer who committed to several $100,000 of outboard inventory when rates were cheap suddenly finds their monthly interest costs jumping by thousands of dollars. From the outside, a sale sign might look like a nice seasonal promotion. Inside the office, it is a reaction to a floor plan statement that made everyone a little sick to their stomach. Some dealers responded early, trimming orders, promoting repowers, and turning inventory back into cash. Others held out, convinced that the old demand would return any week now. The longer they waited, the faster that invisible meter ran. And as the meter ran, something else was changing at the same time: demand itself. When the phones stopped ringing like they used to. Demand for outboards did not evaporate overnight, but it softened in ways that mattered. People went back to work in offices, airplanes filled up again. Families that once had only two choices, stay home or go boating, suddenly had several options competing for the same dollars and weekends. Fuel prices rose, and big offshore rigs with twin 300 horsepower engines started to look like very expensive hobbies to run. Insurance premiums climbed in some regions. For anyone who had stretched to get into a larger boat during the boom, the carrying costs no longer felt like a gift from the universe. On top of that, the used market finally refilled. Boats that would have been snapped up instantly in the boom years started showing up with reduced tags. Some owners, who had always planned to keep a boat forever, decided forever might end sooner if they could lock in a decent price. Dealers soon felt the difference. Where they once juggled deposit lists and called factories begging for extra engines, now they were calling old leads, offering slightly sweeter terms. That is when the uncomfortable question started. If a new engine is not moving at its original price, how far can we drop before we are giving away the margin completely? Is it better to take a small loss today than a bigger one after another half year of interest charges? In that environment, cheap outboards started appearing one by one, then in clusters. A 150 horsepower, 4-stroke bundled with a pontoon, for less than some people had just paid for a bare engine. A brand new 250 horsepower offshore model quietly discounted in a boat show package. Each one was a small signal that the direction of the market was no longer up. The real shift would show up in a place the average boater rarely sees: the auction block. If this is already changing how you look at those too cheap outboards, this is the point where it helps to hear from you. Drop a comment with the engines you are seeing discounted in your area, or any question you have about a specific horsepower range or brand. And we can dig into those in future breakdowns. And if you want more of the stuff you never hear in brochures or boat show booths, hit like and subscribe. That tells the algorithm there is an audience for honest outboard talk, and it lets us keep making videos like this: auctions, repossessions, and the new price floor. When a unit sits too long on floor plan, lenders get nervous. Their business is not to own engines, it is to collect interest and be repaid. When interest rates rise and inventory ages, the risk shifts from dealer to lender, and lenders do not like that feeling. In some cases, lenders will pressure dealers to make curtailment payments, essentially forced principal reductions on slow-moving stock. In more strained situations, they can call loans or repossess units directly. Repossession does not always look dramatic. It can be as simple as a truck showing up, loading a few engines, and taking them to a regional facility where they are prepared for wholesale sale. Those engines, sometimes still in the crate, sometimes pre-rigged on unsold hulls, are then fed into auction channels. At auction, emotion is stripped out. Engines are worth what dealers and wholesalers are willing to pay on that day, given their own risk and floor plan costs. If a 300 horsepower four-stroke that carried a sticker near $30,000 suddenly hammers at a price in the high teens, that sale sends a quiet message through the entire system. A dealer who just watched that auction will have a much harder time asking a retail customer for the old number. A buyer who hears about those auction prices will be less willing to pay full asking on a used engine with several hundred hours and no warranty. So discounts at the front of the house and auction clearances at the back of the house start reinforcing each other, pulling the perceived value of certain engines down, even if the actual reliability and performance of those engines has not changed. This is how a collapse feels from the inside. Nothing is wrong with the aluminum castings. Nothing is wrong with the stainless hardware. The problem lives in balance sheets and expectations. For a smart buyer, this is also where opportunity begins, because not all cheap outboards are cheap for the same reason. Understanding that difference is the key to knowing whether you are buying a bargain or a headache. Engines that are cheap for the right reasons. Some engines are cheaper today simply because the market overshot on the way up and is overcorrecting on the way down. The engines themselves are solid. The circumstances around them are not. This is the group where a smart buyer can take advantage without inheriting a problem. Take a late model 300 horsepower four-stroke from a major brand with under 500 hours, full digital controls, and clean service history. At the peak, a dealer could almost name their price. Today, if that engine is tied up in a distressed boat loan or sitting on a floor plan that has gone sour, the people holding it might prioritize speed over perfection in the final number. From a buyer's point of view, that can mean getting a proven platform at a discount that would have been unthinkable a few seasons ago. The same can be true for bread and butter 150 and 200 horsepower outboards that powered runabouts and pontoons. Dealers ordered huge numbers of these mid-range engines when every lake was crowded and every dock looked full. Now, some of those engines are simply extra. They are no less capable. There are just more of them than the softened demand can comfortably absorb. In these cases, cheap often means the engine is in a place where money needs to move faster than inventory. The seller is willing to accept a smaller margin to avoid a larger loss later. And the underlying product is still exactly what it was when people were paying a premium for it. Smart buyers in this environment focus on verifiable details. They look for engines with clear hour readings, dealer-stamped service records, active warranties where possible, and serial numbers that check out with the manufacturer. When those boxes are ticked, a discount is not a red flag. It is a reflection of broader forces the buyer did not create, but can quietly benefit from. Of course, not every cheap outboard fits that profile. There is another category that looks equally tempting on the price tag, but the story behind it is very different. Engines that are cheap for all the wrong reasons. If you spend time on classifieds or walk around auctions, you will also see engines that seem suspiciously inexpensive, even in this softer market. These are the listings where the pictures look fine, the horsepower rating is attractive, and the price makes you wonder if it is a simple gift from the boating gods. Often, there is a catch. Some of these engines have complex electronic architectures or early-generation digital control systems that dealers quietly dislike working on. The parts are still available, but they may be expensive or require long waits. For a dealer trying to move quickly and minimize future headaches, discounting those engines heavily can feel easier than fighting to convince a cautious buyer that everything will be fine. Other cheap engines carry histories that never quite make it into the advertisement. Maybe the engine lived its early life in a harsh, commercial environment, idling for long stretches and then being pushed hard. Perhaps it spent time bolted to the back of a charter boat that ran almost every day. The hour meter might look acceptable, but the real story lies in how those hours were accumulated. There are also engines that sit on the far edge of upcoming regulatory changes or technological shifts. A big displacement, two-stroke direct injection model, for example, might deliver wonderful power today, but face a more uncertain future for resale in markets that are pushing relentlessly toward cleaner four-strokes and alternative technologies. In these cases, cheap can mean the seller is offloading a problem, while there is still a willing buyer. Future parts, service, or regulatory compliance may be more complicated than with mainstream models. And the engine has already lived a much harder life than the photographs suggest. For boaters, the challenge is separating one kind of cheap from the other. That means asking for compression test results, talking directly to mechanics who have worked on that family of engines, and being honest with yourself about your appetite for risk. In a collapsing or correcting market, there will always be engines that look like steals and turn out to be expensive lessons. The trick is to understand which broader forces are pushing that price down before you hand over the check. Rumors, regulations, and the 2026. Question. Hovering over all of this is a quieter anxiety about the future. Many boaters have heard conversations about tighter emissions rules, electrification, and changing attitudes toward big internal combustion engines, even if they do not follow every detail of proposed regulations. Manufacturers are investing heavily in cleaner combustion technology, more precise fuel control, and, in some cases, hybrid or fully electric propulsion projects. None of this changes what is on the back of your boat today, but it does shape what dealers and lenders think will be easiest to finance and resell 5 or 10 years from now. When a dealer looks at a warehouse full of engines and hears talk about stricter emissions targets around the middle of the decade, there is an understandable urge to move anything that might become harder to justify later. That does not mean those engines will suddenly become illegal overnight, but sentiment matters in markets just as much as formal rules. Rumor, more than regulation, often pushes the first domino. The idea that big gasoline outboards might be punished is enough to make some buyers hesitate, and some lenders more conservative. Hesitation spreads out the time it takes to move each engine, and in a floor-planned world, time translates directly into cost. So when you see a surprisingly low price on a large displacement four-stroke or a high horsepower offshore engine, part of what you are seeing is that soft, hard-to-measure cloud of concern about where things might go in the later half of this decade. No one can say with certainty exactly how tightly rules will be enforced, or how quickly electric propulsion will become mainstream offshore. But the mere possibility that things will be different is already baked into today's pricing. For buyers who plan to hold an engine for a long time and use it in regions that are slower to change, that uncertainty might feel manageable. For buyers who flip boats every few seasons or live in areas with aggressive environmental policy, the same uncertainty might be the line between a bargain and a boat they cannot easily sell later. What is clear is that the market is no longer just about horsepower and fuel burn. It is also about how people imagine the future of boating, even if the details are still blurry. Mechanics, dealers, and what they whisper off camera. If you ask a mechanic off camera what they think about the current wave of cheap outboards, the answer is rarely a simple thumbs up or thumbs down. Some will tell you this is the best time in years for a thoughtful buyer who does their homework. They see solid, late-model engines coming through the shop for pre-purchase inspections, where the only real problem is the original owner's timing. One boater might be forced to sell because of a job change or a payment they can no longer justify. And another steps in and picks up the same package at a price that actually makes sense. Other mechanics will quietly warn that they are already seeing the other side of the story. Engines that were neglected during the boom years because getting a service appointment was difficult, or because owners assumed a modern four-stroke could be ignored like an appliance, are now being dressed up for sale. Fresh paint on the skig, shiny covers, a vague service history that sounds fine, but does not quite match what they see when they pull the plugs. Dealers have their own version of that split view. A few are candid that they overordered and are now paying for it. They talk about learning to live with smaller, tighter inventories, and focusing on engines and packages that they know will move steadily, rather than chasing every new trend. Others insist that things will bounce back to the old frenzy, at least in peak seasons, and are more prepared to gamble on stocking up again when interest rates feel friendlier. Whether they are right or not will not be clear for years, but their attitude shapes what shows up on the lot and at what price. Listening to those quiet comments fills in the gaps between the charts and the headlines. It suggests that this cheap phase is not just a glitch, but a correction that is forcing everyone in the chain, from manufacturers down to weekend boaters, to think a little more carefully about what they buy, how they finance it, and how they maintain it. What buyers are seeing on their screens. For most boaters, this collapse does not show up as charts or balance sheets. It shows up as late-night scrolling. You open a classified site or a dealer listing page and start to notice engines that would have been gone in a day sitting there for week after week. A clean 200 horsepower four-stroke at a price that used to belong to a much older motor. A pair of mid-range outboards still on a bracket, offered as a package because the hull they lived on sold for parts after a storm. You start to notice patterns. Certain horsepower ranges, like 150 to 200 horsepower, seem to have a lot of options. Some brands carry slightly richer asking prices than others, even when the hours and rigging look similar. A few listings keep dropping a little each weekend, almost as if the seller is testing where the real floor is. From a distance, it can be hard to tell which of these listings represent a dealer quietly trying to clean up a floor plan problem, and which are individual owners simply ready to move on. The photos rarely show the interest bill or the bank letter that pushed the decision. But that feeling many buyers describe, that sense of something is off here, this looks cheaper than it should be, is usually not a coincidence. It is the retail end of all the forces we have just walked through, finally showing themselves in a place anyone with an internet connection can see. How boaters can navigate the next few years. Looking ahead from the middle of this decade toward the end of it, the immediate collapse phase is unlikely to last forever. Dealers are adjusting their ordering habits, lenders are revising their risk models, and manufacturers are watching inventory levels much more carefully than during the rush of the pandemic years. As excess stock is cleared, the most dramatic discounts will probably fade. New engine prices are still anchored to real costs: aluminum, advanced electronics, labor, research, and development. Those inputs have not become dramatically cheaper. The bargains today are mostly a function of timing and leverage, not a permanent reset in what it costs to build complex four-stroke outboards. For owners, the lesson is that boats and engines are not immune to the cycles that affect cars, houses, or any other asset. Buying at the top of a frenzy can feel clever in the moment and painful a few years later. Buying when everyone is nervous, but the fundamentals of what you are purchasing remain strong, is usually safer. For potential buyers, the next several years could be a sweet spot. There will still be pockets of stressed inventory, occasional auctions where nearly new engines change hands for surprisingly low wholesale prices, and dealers willing to structure creative packages on repowers and boat motor combinations. But this window requires discipline. It rewards people who walk away from deals that feel fuzzy, who insist on independent mechanical inspections, and who are more interested in a trustworthy engine at a fair discount than in chasing the absolute cheapest listing they can find. For dealers, the path forward is narrower but clearer. That era when you could order almost any mid-range or offshore outboard and be confident it would sell instantly is gone. In its place is a more careful game, matching inventory to actual local demand, resisting the temptation to overextend on floor plan credit, and educating customers about total ownership costs instead of just horsepower numbers. And for the industry as a whole, this collapse is a reminder. Even in a niche as specific as outboard engines, you cannot break the basic rules of supply, demand, and debt without consequences. You can only delay them for a while. So when you scroll past a listing for a suspiciously cheap 300 horsepower outboard, or walk past a dealer lot with more discount banners than you remember seeing a few summers ago, you are not imagining it. The shift from scarcity to surplus is real, and most of it traces back to how these engines were ordered, financed, and unloaded when the music slowed down. If you are seeing strange prices or odd patterns in your local market, drop a comment with what you are noticing, or a question about a specific brand or horsepower range you want us to dig into. And if you want more of the context that never shows up in brochures or boat show booths, hit like and subscribe. It tells the platform there is an audience for honest outboard talk, and it lets us keep making videos like this